So before we were actually put into what I call lockdown practically, I'm just like an animal. I started to sort of close in. So instead of going to my studio, which is in my backyard, it wasn't going to require a great deal of effort to get there. I just brought a big watercolor pad and watercolors to my dining room table and sat at my dining room table and faced west. And this is basically, it's my version of what I see out the window. It was a really nice exercise that kept me sort of in the game and kept me from worrying about what I was going to do big time, if you know what I mean. So that was really the beginning of this show. And I don't usually work from anything specific like that. And they're all watercolors. You know, when I went to really check the medium of everything that I'd done, I realized I didn't even bring my acrylics into the house. So that's unusual for me too. And I loved the fact that I was watching the winter trees start to bud, and it's a deciduous tree in front of a conifer. It's basically the 10 paintings go from the tree before it started to bud to when it was in full bloom. So I wasn't painting one a day. It was probably took a month to paint those. At which point I could go back to my studio and start again, and it was a whole different thing. I was working from my interior rather than from what was outside the window. Yeah, there was with the trees, definitely, because I knew looking at, I'd noticed these trees before. I'd never painted them before. But a deciduous tree in front of a fir tree, the deciduous tree is basically a filigree at the beginning, and I knew if I did it long enough that those leaves I knew what I was doing, that those leaves would burst, and eventually the deciduous tree would cover so definitely there is that passage of time. That was actually probably the basis of the whole thing. When I started, I knew that I would stay with it until that tree was covered. So. No, I did it to see if I could do it. I was married to an abstract painter, and I always liked how he could, when he veered towards anything literal, he would go the other way. I had my instinct is always to go to the very specific, to the details. Practically the nose hairs. It's not a great idea, but I had those 4 sheets of paper, and I attached them together. So I had a weirdly more structured basis than what I'm used to. And I just very quickly painted that abstract painting. So it was almost like giving myself an assignment, going way back when you're in school. I was actually very pleased with what I'd done. And then it sat in my studio. I may have done that actually in January. So that may precede everything that you see in this show. And I was always very happy with what I'd done, but I couldn't take it anywhere. When I went back to work on it, I thought I was going to be able to make it better. I couldn't improve on it. It was fine the way it was. Once I decided to work on it, I basically had to destroy what was there, aside from the fact that the color was very intense, and I wanted that painting as opposed to this big painting, which is so pastel. I was very determined to keep the strength of the color in that original painting, even though I had to say goodbye to the totally abstract. I had a fairly traditional art school training, and that was oil painting on canvas, and I never, could never make it work. I was much too impatient, so buildup of oil paint always turned to mud for me, and I was I think I was lucky that the acrylics really came into, they were there when I needed them. They were relatively new, and it's perfect. You know, there's nothing aesthetically wonderful about acrylic paint. It's not like oil paint. It has no cachet whatsoever. But it worked for me, and I could paint over and over and over things, and it didn't turn to mud. I'm selective about my paper, interestingly, but Okawara paper, which is a Japanese printing paper, and I think it's designed for Japanese water-based prints. It's very beautiful, and it looks somewhat, I guess it doesn't look fragile. I like the color of it. It's off-white, and it's fairly thin. It does not look sturdy, but it is held up under my brush for a long time. If paper doesn't, there's some kinds of Japanese paper that you can't do what I do on, because it basically tears up the surface. But for some reason, Okawara paper is fine. So if a paper doesn't hold up for me, I don't try to fight it. You know, I just think it's sad. I can't make it work. With a small painting, I could do everything basically with a brush. With a big painting, I couldn't, I had to develop different ways of keeping myself going. And one of them was, instead of making small things with a brush, if I was going to make a printed pattern, I did things like put paint on my fist, you know, and I would get the same sort of release from the business at hand, but without the, you know, it just didn't translate. You couldn't just do this if you were painting this big. And then the collage came in similarly. I did a lot of collage with just punched dots that I made a sort of secondary pattern in the painting. It was a way of keeping me going. It was a rhythmic thing. And so it's also a very quick way to take care of what you've done that you don't like, even though you can really, for a long time, paint over an acrylic paint. It's easier if you just cut another piece of paper and, you know, put it on. So I don't think of myself as a collagist. I just use it as a tool, I guess. Because of COVID, it changed our life. So it wasn't an abstract thing for me, but also being old and I have a large family, and a lot of the family is around. I've been very careful. I don't want to get COVID, and I know that it's real. I had all these things planned for 2020. You know, I write about this, New Year's Eve, it looked so good, 2020, perfect, you know, I've always had bad eyes, a perfect vision. We were all looking forward to 2020, and then we got slammed. And one after another, my sort of dream plans, I was going to Oaxaca, I've never been there, I've shown there. I was going to go to LA for Easter, all these things, and I realized that you couldn't make any plans. I mean, it wasn't just me. None of us could. Once we were sheltered in place, And I just decided, it's funny, now that it's a sort of finished project, I can hardly remember why I thought I could squeeze this in, you know, while I was painting. because it was a lot of work. I don't usually work collaboratively, and I had to explain to the people in my family and my friends why I was doing this. And then you say, I just want a black and white horizontal photograph of you sheltered in place. And you'd be surprised how many people don't follow directions. I'd get photographs that were vertical and in color, and then you'd have to, so each one of these photographs required a lot of conversation. So in a way, I kept in touch with the people that I loved and cared about in a, how do you want to call it, sort of a sideways, by having this project. Anyway, the project turned out to be I do this. I have a quick idea, and then you don't have any idea how much work it's going to be. So basically, that's what I'm trying to say. But the work was essential to everything else that I did, because in the process, I wasn't grieving about my own sort of selfish losses, that I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that. I was actually sort of inviting all those people back into my life in a way. Anyway, I'm glad I did it. But it was really a very important part of this year's work. So that's so strange. It's not my medium at all.